In language education, why is there always a disconnection between applied linguistics research and the day-to-day classroom realities of learners and teachers? What are the primary goals of applied linguistics research, and how do they differ from the immediate concerns of classroom teachers? In this talk, Professor Melinda Whong, Director of the Center for Language Education at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, emphasizes the importance of bridging the gap between practice and theory in language education through scholarship. She advocates for bi-directional discourse and practitioner-framed research. Scholarship, distinct from traditional research, should be recognized and valued for its contribution to teaching and learning. Professor Whong also calls for more outlets to publish scholarship, emphasizing its role in professional development and the need for respect and recognition of the differences between educators and researchers.
It's really fantastic to be here, and I'm especially glad to be able to speak on this topic, which goes dear to my heart. In fact, my entire career professionally has been devoted to this topic. So I think that my background is probably quite typical in a lot of ways to a lot of people in this field. I was a trained teacher. I decided to see the world, and one way to see the world is to teach language because language is taught everywhere. And then I thought, well, I better get some proper qualification to back up what I've been doing just a little bit for fun, teaching and not very formally. And then that's where I met linguistics and second language acquisition. And I got completely caught up in it and did a master's and did a PhD. I think I'm really typical in that way. And then entered the role as an academic, as an applied linguist. For better or for worse, the linguistics that I found myself in and the linguistics I found myself excited by was very formal, generative Chomskyan linguistics. So my training was in this very formal approach to second language acquisition, but my identity was a teacher. So that's why my entire life has been trying to bridge this gap. And one of the earliest things I wrote was this book that you see the cover here, Language Teaching, Linguistic Theory and Practice. And what I want to do today is I want to share with you how after many, many, many years, I think finally I have a couple of useful ideas to share. Bridging the gap. I tried many different ways to bridge the gap when I first started, including impact initiatives. We all have impact. We set up some networks between Leeds and York mostly, where we invited school teachers in and we invited fellow teachers in, and we were trying to share the theory and tried to have the teachers interact with us so that we could, for the better of all of us, move forward in language education. But every time we did it, I was left with a very uncomfortable feeling, to be perfectly honest. This is actually what I felt like when I did these activities. I felt like I've built this bridge. I know I'm just junior, and I know I'm not very good at bridge building, but they don't even seem to be walking across it as I had in mind. So on the one hand, I felt like, oh, I'm ticking all those boxes. I'm supposed to be doing impact. I'm supposed to be sharing the knowledge. But it was really clear to me that the teachers were very, very polite and actually seemed genuinely pleased that we were having these kinds of sessions. It wasn't really leading to where I wanted to go. And in fact, at some points, I almost thought, well, maybe the whole approach is wrong. Maybe I should build a boat instead. What's going on here? Throughout all of this, everything I'm trying to do is entirely well-meaning. The intention is entirely good. But in fact, those teachers who are willing to just be sort of honest and frank, a lot of them said things like, very, very interesting, but, I have to teach tomorrow. Sort of the message is, what you've just told me and what I have to do tomorrow, yeah? So I've never given up, and I've always continued to try to bridge the gap. But one thing I've come to realize is that the bridging, I think, and one of the insights I want to try to convince you of this morning, is that bridging the gap has often been unidirectional, has been coming from one side. That was one of the first realizations I had, and I have been trying to find ways to address this. And I think now it's only from actually working with teaching practitioners that I have finally realized, and this is what I want to share with you. So I've had the pleasure of being able to work within a language center for nearly 10 years now. Time flies, you get old quickly, right? For nearly 10 years, really moving from a very typical academic researcher into this more administrative position, which has given me incredible insights, and I think has given me an education that I couldn't have got otherwise. So the theme of this talk, or the argument of this talk, is that what we really need is we need to build from both directions. To me, I think if we don't do this, then we'll always be a bit stuck. There'll always be a limit to what we can achieve. This is what I want to convince you of. So to set the scene, language education is the context in which I'm speaking, but I suppose what I'm saying might apply to other domains. We're talking about two groups of people. We've got, on the one hand, researchers, applied linguists. We've got, on the other hand, practitioners, professional educators. These are two groups of people. As you can see from my slide, they could be seen as two teams. Yes, two teams. But I want to keep us focused on the idea that we all have shared interests. In abstract terms, we have absolutely the same intentions. We're interested in language development. We're interested in language learning. We can put some specific labels and some specific emphasis on this, like input, output, motivation strategies. We're all interested and we're all dedicated to these things. I don't think there's anyone in either team that would say, no, I don't care about that. Yeah, we have these shared interests. But in reality, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., it's a very different reality. Very, very different in everyday terms. There are different pressures. There are different job descriptions. The contracts tend to be different. And different career paths. I said I was typical, but I'm a particular profile. A career path for a practitioner and a career path for applied linguist is typically different, with lots of variation. Within applied linguistics, the researcher team, there has been genuine concern over many, many years. And I think all applied linguists very, very much resonate with this challenge. So I've put just two examples to show for decades now the issues that divide, changing values, what's the use of those theories? And then a little bit more currently, I just like this quote of Andy Curtis because he's just being very, very holding up his hand and saying, let's take responsibility ourselves. One of the reasons for the disconnect is the tendency of professional academics to write for each other. Applied linguists write about language, classrooms are writing for other applied linguists. There's no bad intent anywhere, but there are a lot of pressures that are leading to the context in which we operate. Pennier, more recently, theory and practice in the context of language teaching are not polar opposites, but points on a continuum. I like that. That's closer to now where I'm taking my thinking as well. In fact, I think a continuum view is a useful way to think about the many pressures that we have to face. So as applied linguists, as linguist educators doing research, we really want to have a positive effect on classroom teaching and learning. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want to. That's why we're doing research. We want to have this positive effect. Yet at the same time, there's a lot of pressure to demonstrate impact. I know from firsthand, which is why we put on sessions that, to me, felt a little bit less than satisfying. We want to produce research that has new findings. Of course, that's what we're wanting to do. We're researchers. But there's also this pressure for citation statistics. This pressure that this one big study I did might make me 4 publications instead of 1. The context in which we live is pushing us in that direction. We also really want to share knowledge. I've just realized this. I'm going to share this. The other end of the continuum is this notion of professionally developing others. And this is something that's really started to bother me over the years. And I'm going to come back to this towards the end of the talk. And hopefully by then it'll be clear why I'm feeling a little bit funny about that concept. In the other team, language practitioners. Also, pressures that can be seen on a continuum. We all want to keep current. We all want to know what the research is. We all want to know what's happening and what's the newest thinking. Everyone wants that. But at the same time, when we go to conferences and we read what's out there, there's a lot of it that feels like, this doesn't feel so relevant. For my class of 22, it doesn't feel all that relevant sometimes. Very, very nicely, Andy gave us a great talk about teacher agency. I should have been thinking more carefully to call it agency instead of autonomy here, right? And the importance of this, which then with the pressures can sometimes on the other end of the continuum be that, leave me alone. The reality is we close the door and we do our thing, yeah? One reason I love working with language education practitioners is that the devotion and the dedication to students is it's palpable. It's just what drives the people I work with. And I find that very inspiring. And everything, and as a theme in this talk, that practitioners do tends to be motivated by trying to be better for the students. The other end of the continuum is, it's the students that matter. How dare you also ask me to? There's no research in my contract. Some real tensions here. So to me, the way forward is to really focus on those shared interests, to really focus on the ultimate aims. However, in doing that, I think it's also equally, and maybe at this point, even more important, to recognize those differences. To recognize that the different teams, the different sets of people do have different expertise. And I feel like that's missing a little bit for us in our field. When I say our field, I mean both teams together. Language educators and language researchers are not the same people. It's just really, really obvious. But actually, if we accept that, we respect that, I think it leads to some profound differences. And so that's where my starting point for trying to figure out how to build this bridge. Of course, it's not just the two teams. There are many, many constituents involved in this complex context that we work in. Researchers, practitioners, students. I could have made this slide fuller. Policymakers, administrators like me. Yeah, there's lots and lots of people and lots of pressures involved. But my argument is what we really need is bi-directional discourse. My reading of the literature, my trying to stay on top of the field, my feeling is that a number of these constituents are represented and are speaking and contributing. But I see a bit of a blind spot in applied linguistics. To me, that blind spot is the practitioner voice. I don't actually see the practitioner, him or herself, in the published literature very much. A lot of the student voice is coming out, focus groups, interviewing students, a lot of work towards even getting students to do some publication type. But the practitioner voice, especially given how many practitioners we have and the place they hold in the context, I don't see a lot of the practitioner voice in published work is what I'm saying. So this is what leads me to this idea that we need scholarship. So in the past couple of years, my main focus has been to argue for, to champion, to advocate this concept of scholarship as an activity in its own right. And one reason I feel that my job as an administrator is very satisfying is because it's put me in a position where I can try to influence this kind of thing at a center level that's having genuine impact on the lives of people I work with. Yeah. So that's the satisfying side of being an administrator. To me, it's by recognizing scholarship that we can really begin to address this challenge. We need to recognize it in its own activity and have more of it in the public domain. So I need to first start off by explaining what I mean by its own activity. I always start with the definition of Schulman, who was capturing a movement that was coming out of the U.S. at the time in the 1990s. And this is the definition that I see most widely published, that scholarship is exploration which is made public, peer-reviewed, and critiqued and exchanged with members of the professional community so they can, in turn, build on our work. And for the first few years of trying to promote this, I was really focusing on this. Yeah. The problem of teaching is you go in, you shut the door, you get on with it. It's quite a private thing. Scholarship primarily is something that is out there. It's public. It's not something that's private. And we do a lot of scholarship as practicing teachers, and we need to make sure that as we're doing it, we put it in some form that can be peer-reviewed, critiqued, because the whole point of being an intellectual and an academic is adding to the body of knowledge. But it took me a while to realize that I was missing the main point. And the main point is that scholarship is about teaching and learning. Scholarship is 100% oriented to the classroom, to students, to teaching, to learning. So a more simple definition is scholarship are those questions, those needs that arise when teaching. Those needs lead to attempts to address them. That's what teachers do all the time. When they do it in a way that's principled and systematic, that output is then scholarship. That's my definition of scholarship. And I do think the word attempt is important because in the classroom context, we don't have the luxury of researching something before we try it. We walk in, something we thought was good is failing right here, right in front of me. We've got to modify and try something. The next day, we have another chance. We need to keep attempting. Just to step back a minute, I am using the word practitioner here. And I think it's an important concept. To me, a practitioner is a teacher, but isn't more than a teacher, in that a practitioner practices professionally. And I wanted to put this slide in because I want to say that my context here in my thinking is university level teaching. I also want to say clearly I am not excluding other levels. I'm not excluding secondary or primary. But I want to say that my comments here are really about tertiary only because that's my experience and that's my context in which I'm working. And I don't want to make claims beyond what I feel confident I can argue for. So to me, at university level, in language education, if we have teachers teaching academic language at university level, how can we do this if you yourself are not regularly engaged in academic activity? So this is the perspective I feel quite strongly about, that if you're operating at this level, we're teaching university kids, bright kids, yeah? That scary moment, have we all had it when you realize your students are smarter than you? Right? Really, some really, really bright kids. If we're working at university level, we should also, teaching language at university level, the genre, how can we do that unless we ourselves are operating at that level? To me, practitioners at university level, they have core responsibilities of teaching, which affect their identity and makes them in that teaching team versus the linguist team, applied linguist team. And usually, if they're on a teaching contract, research is not formally a part of the contract. Yeah, not like this is difference, right? Tenure track versus teaching track. However, practitioners do academic inquiry to support their teaching. I carefully chose this word, academic inquiry, because I don't want to define my definition with my own word. I don't know any competent, contributing language practitioner who's not doing academic inquiry as their career progresses. Yeah. To me, we need a label instead of just saying this is something that those people do. To me, we need a label. Why? We need to capture the academic work that educators do. Otherwise, I think it's hard for it to have the status and the legitimacy that I think it needs. Why? We all know the importance of discourse. If we don't have a label for something, if we don't actually recognize something as something that exists, it's impossible to get the recognition, the social capital that is necessary in the community within which we work. And then a third reason, university level. How much higher can you go as a language educator? We are at the highest end. We teach at university level. If we aren't the ones who are innovating, if we aren't the ones who are positively contributing, who are taking risks, who are trying cool new things, then who is? I think the whole teaching profession, very legitimately, constant feeling of overwork, not enough time, and it's because it's the human interaction. I can always do better for my students. There's no end to that. I can always do better, always. But I think if doing better in this moment, spending 1 more hour giving much more detailed feedback for this set of 20 students, valuable, but if I don't actually take the time to remain intellectually active and current and to do the things I need to do to remain academically stimulated, if I'm not actually trying new things, the students today are gaining 3 new concepts or 3 new points of feedback, but the students tomorrow are not benefiting because I haven't had the chance to keep myself current and to do what I need to do. So what label? Okay, it's obvious. Scholarship. So scholarship, academic activity that informs teaching but isn't teaching itself. Scholarship does not equate exactly to research, and it includes activity that is not research. So for the third bullet point, for example, in my center and a lot of language centers, language is taught in smaller groups because you need that interaction, but it still has to be a course. So typically the person responsible for the course has written something that 5, 10, sometimes 35 different people are teaching. It is not just a random set of bullet points. It is a piece of scholarship. It is like a textbook. A good course has teacher's notes that says the reason we're doing this is because we know that engagement's crucial, that cites the literature so that teachers are aware of how what they're teaching connects into the research that we're doing. That is a piece of scholarship. It does not equate exactly to research, and that what I just described is totally not research. I want to focus, though, on this next bit on the relationship between scholarship and research to try to clarify what I'm suggesting. To do so, let's go to basics. Why do we do research? We want to understand something better. We want to make a positive contribution. What is it? It's got to be evidence-based, the old scientific method. There's a theoretical framework. We're all on the same page. Research is incremental. A good research question has focus, is very specific. We all know, either from supervising PhDs or doing them ourselves, that when you first start off your research question, yeah, and then you realize, actually, and even, 3 months before submission, no, I've got to revise that. It's very incremental, and by the end of it, it's contributing a piece, but a small piece of the puzzle. That's research. Please don't get me wrong. It's valuable. I have nothing against research, so please don't take it the wrong way. Incredibly valuable. But I had a light bulb moment a few years ago working with practitioners when I realized, wait a minute. I was working with practitioners, but teaching on an MA, teaching second language acquisition, right? So I'm doing 2 things in the same day. And then I realized, wait. Research is theory-driven. Yeah, should be. It's research. Theory-driven research will lead to theory-oriented findings. We advance theory. Fine. No wonder whenever I'm trying to convey what I'm saying isn't all that relevant for practice because that's not why I did the thing to begin with. Yeah? Light bulb moment for me. So if you're sitting there actively taking this in and thinking, oh, I've got a question for, because how about classroom research? It's situated in theory. Doesn't usually test a theory directly, usually classroom research. We usually test input, output, hypothesis, implicit, explicit form, all these things. It's not testing the theory. We're testing effectiveness. We're testing the approach. So how about that? How about that? I agree. It's very, very useful. My observation is that even that, which is useful, can still be a bit abstract. It can still be a little bit stepped away because by definition, it's research where you have to control. You have to have variables. You have to have conditions that you have to make sure so that you can demonstrate something with validity. So that it can be, but also, crucially, I would say, yeah, I would include this in my definition of scholarship. There's no problem there. And so what I'm working towards is a relationship where there is overlap. See your Venn diagram. Oh, I didn't do a slide with a Venn diagram. So yeah, some research is scholarship and research, fine. No problem, yeah? But crucially, the difference, and I would say most of scholarship is not that. It's not classroom research and shouldn't be. Doesn't need to be, I should say. Not shouldn't be, but doesn't need to be. Scholarship is by teachers, for teaching, ultimately for students. To me, another step in the fundamental difference light bulb was, wait a minute, who's asking the questions? And a realization that who is asking the questions very much shapes what those questions end up being. When teachers ask the questions, very different things happen. I want to share with you a wonderful experience I had that helped move me to this realization. I worked with a group of teachers just before I came to Hong Kong to put a volume together called What is Good Academic Writing? Insights into Discipline-Specific Student Writing. And what I learned from this exercise is what happens when the motivation for doing the research is actually teaching and learning. What I learned is what happens when teachers ask the questions. I've also put on this slide a 2024 recently published, not even sure you can buy it yet, volume that came out of Hong Kong. And this is another example of all practitioners doing scholarship, another edited volume, edited by Melinda Whong over at HKMU, that came out of a UGC-funded project that allowed teachers to come together and to do some scholarship work and to share it. Yeah. Examples of practitioner-framed scholarship. Even the question, what is good academic writing? You won't be surprised to know the way this came about was a bunch of us, teachers, sitting in the room, marking against deadlines, and a conversation that got struck up. Oh, wait, what's good writing? This is good writing. This is good writing here. Is this good writing? But wait, what's good writing in media studies compared to history, compared to physics? And a realization that we weren't entirely sure. So we went out. Oh, yeah, there's lots of smart people, lots of researchers doing research in a genre. We know the differences, but we don't know all those differences. And there are a lot of gaps, that was the conclusion. And so we said, well, why don't we find out ourselves? What happened was a volume that had each chapter taking an incredibly different orientation to what I had conceptualized when I first started this project, because I had a very traditional theory-driven research model in my head. But because we inspired and allowed and encouraged the teachers to each take the question where they wanted to, we ended up with some really, really interesting, very different sorts of pieces of work. I'm going to tell you about the first one in design. What is clarity? What makes writing clear? Initially, she's working in a school of design. What's academic writing in design? I have no idea. Yeah? How would I know that? To find out, because she's wanting to help her students, she took a good piece of writing, good, it got an A, and a less good, it didn't get an A. And she asked, I can't remember how many, 4 or 5 faculty to mark it, to put comments, so that she could then analyze and see, right? Very reasonable thing to do. And then she went and she spoke to them. And she said, okay, why is this why good? Why is this not? And she got over and over and over, they said, it's not clear, it's not clear. And actually, I think, oh, yeah. When I mark essays, I write that too, right? Do you? When you're working, it's not clear, right? I forget to say it's clear, but I often say it's not clear, right? She came to me. She thinks, I'm the director, I have a professor, I have a PhD. She says, yeah, clear. What's the research on clarity? In applied linguistics, yeah. What's the definition of clear? How do we know? How? Anybody? What's the research? I don't know. I don't know of any. Go and look. She couldn't find any. I couldn't find any. Very interesting. Why does she want to know this? It's coming up all the time. The students need it, but we couldn't find it. So she takes a stab at it. But what can she do? There's a limit to what she can do. But she raises this problem that we could use some more work here. Each chapter took a very different approach, and lots of different ideas came out of this. Each chapter, I sent them out for 2 peer reviewers. Please have a go and look at these chapters. I want to share with you a typical response. Please read. I honestly don't remember which chapter it was, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? It's probably better. And I won't tell you who this was. If I mentioned her name, you would all go, yeah, it's someone we know. It's someone really, really well-known in our field. So it looks like, okay, sorry, we can't publish this, right? Please read. Yeah, this is one of my earliest indications of, wait, there's something different going on here. And I actually spoke to her, and I said, look, your first comment makes it sound like we shouldn't publish stuff if it's not rigorous, if it's not. But your second comment, she said, oh, no, you've got to publish it. I learned so much. And she said, no, it's fascinating. And I was just left with so many questions and things I want to think about now. So definitely we should publish that, right? Yeah, kind of interesting. The difference here, what makes good writing, is the point of view. A student has a very different need when they say, I want to be a good writer. Very different need from our favorite subject specialist, who has an idea of what's good writing, versus our favorite applied linguist, versus our practitioner, who wants to be able to teach it very well. So the practitioner is not doing text analysis for text analysis' sake, not trying to advance genre theory, though they might find something that's very useful, but that's not why they're doing it. They're not trying to explore the limits of methodologies, which is also very important in the research world. That's not why they're doing it. They're trying to do it for this much more specific motivation of students in teaching and learning. This project led to quite a lot of interesting questions, and I've since gone back now that I'm seeing it this way. At the moment when I was working in it, I wasn't quite seeing how this was what was happening. But I've since gone back, and through the volume, these are the kinds of questions that have come out. Does a good mark mean good writing? My intuition, right? But do we have research on this? Does a good mark mean good writing? Yeah. Generalizations. What do we do when we teach? We have to teach generalizations, because where are we going to start? But how far do generalizations take a novice writer? How far can they take? And which generalizations are useful? And I think these two questions now have just become even more important and interesting because of generative AI, right? What does generative AI do? It does patterns. It does generalizations. It cannot take it to that next level, right? But now we're talking about how when we move to word processing, it upped the game because typos totally unacceptable now. Typo? Are you joking? The thing will fix it for you, right? My optimistic view is that that's what generative AI is going to do for us now. It's another revolutionary raising. Generalizations can take that novice writer. Generative AI, throw it in, It will do that core basic, this is the formulaic thing to do. Right? How far will it take? So I think it'll take you as far as generative AI will. But then we need that expertise. We need the understanding, the analysis of the context. Where does language end and argumentation or knowledge of content begin? Oof. Huge challenge when you're teaching language. Oh, you just fixed the language, right? So, all of our practitioners are teaching the language to make sure that when they go to the marketing and they turn in their marketing assignment, the marketing professor's happy. This one's got to make sure that the chemistry professor's happy. But can you really pull apart language from idea? How can you do that? No, and the marketing person says, no, don't comment on the idea. Just fix the language. How can you fix language if you're not engaging with the idea? Because the fix has to do with what you're trying to say. It's quite messy, right? A lot more research in this area would be very, very welcome. How do subject specialists understand the marking criteria they use? Do they consider student understanding? What's the practitioner's understanding? So these are some of the things that were coming out of the work that was done. And then the last one, the clarity one. So summary so far, bi-directional discourse is what I think is needed. In order to do this, I think we need to recognize the difference between scholarship and research. And I've come to more and more think this is important. When I think about, I can't think of a better word than this, but the baggage that's connected with research. If you're on a research contract, in the research context in which we live, there's RAE, there are metrics, there's citation, which is driving a lot of things that I'm not going to talk about here, not my place, but not very helpful for what I'm trying to promote with this scholarship idea. So I've been working very hard to try to encourage my practitioners to not be claiming to do research. If they're claiming to do research, there is a very clear, rigorous definition of research that they might be doing, but isn't in their contract and isn't realistically what I'm asking them to do. I'm asking them to be scholarly and to take a scholarship approach. My concern is if we try to make it research, and then what if I get my university to agree that there should be a certain amount of research in my practitioner's contract? Suddenly the expectation is going to be something that's, I don't want to do, I think that would be very detrimental to our center. That's going to take it to a different level. Back to the two teams. These are two sets of people. And I don't think we should be putting the expectation for set A, team A on team B. I don't think that will get us where we need to be. Though people who want to do research are, there's the Venn diagram, scholarly research, absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I think that the target is not accepting and respecting that we're talking about two different groups of people here. Full respect for scholarship as distinct activity, work of value as academic endeavor, and more outlets. I'm just going to say a very quick word about number 2 and then say a little bit more about number 3. So it's number 2 that takes me back to the point I mentioned earlier. Academic exploration, scholarship. It's not training, and it's not CPD. It started to bother me a little bit, and it took me a while to realize why, until I came to this position that I'm trying to share with you today. Working in the context of language centers and practitioners, everything is couched as CPD. CPD is important. Everybody needs it. We all had to do that workshop on Zoom. We all had to learn how to do the Zoom thing, right? When the pandemic came. That's CPD. But when I try something in my classroom, and I do it rigorously, principled means I do it because it's coming out of what the research is telling me. I do it because the framework I'm working in says this is how we're trying to approach our teaching and learning. So it's principled. And it's systematic. I don't just randomly do it. In order to see if it worked, I have to do something to measure something at the end to see if it worked. So that's what I mean by principled and systematic. And then I come to some conclusion. It's not scholarship yet because I haven't shared it. It isn't public. So instead, I put my hand up and say, in our weekly series, I want to share what I did and what I found. That's becoming scholarship. When I do this, I have certainly led to my own development. It's not CPD. Imagine if the physics department called it CPD. Yeah? Everyone, please come along to our weekly CPD. No. But of course, the research you do also leads to your own development. That's the whole point of research. You're understanding better. So to me, it's this kind of thing that isn't properly respecting and recognizing the expertise that practitioners have. And if we don't recognize it to begin with, how can we then ask people to build on it or to do something with it? Outlets. So if it's going to be bi-directional, we need to have places for publication. So there are a number of journals that are practitioner-oriented, shall we say. But not just practitioner journals, but within them, there are some categories that are really inviting more the practitioner voice. So there are some out there. There are also some resource banks. I didn't put a big list, but you know what I'm talking about, where you can go, you can download materials and that kind of thing, which is a form of making public. And then there's magazines. There are some magazines, and I think earlier was mentioned blogs. There are all sorts of form. But I feel like there isn't enough out there that's by practitioners, for practitioners. So I am, again, just like I'm not against research. Let me just say it again. I'm not against it. I'm not against it. I'm not against it. And I'm really happy that journals are opening doors like this, and I want them to do more and more and more and more. But I feel like there's space for defining a new genre of output and publication type that's by practitioners, and instead of trying to square the circle and make the practitioner voice feel comfortable in a different domain. So in addition. So I want to introduce to you a brand new platform, and I avoid the J word, journal, platform, because I'm just trying to make this distinction, called STILE, Scholarship of Teaching and Language Education, that exists thanks to the wonderful UGC. Thank you. Who funded this to allow a number of us to come together to conceptualize, to think about it. And what was really fun putting this thing together was really trying to interrogate. And a lot of what I'm saying today came because of the small project group that spent hours and hours trying to think about what we're trying to create here. So it's a new outlet for scholarship. Please do have a look. These are the categories. You can submit research. See? However, if it's not directly related to teaching and learning, if it doesn't have, then we will invite you to take it to the many different places you can put it, right? It's reviews and reflection that we're hoping will start to allow that practitioner voice. What I'm hoping to receive as a current editor in this volume, I would love it if some practitioner would take some really well-known theory, the Douglas-Fir framework. I don't care which one, processing instruction. It doesn't really matter. Take one and then bring it back to us through the eyes of a practitioner. Wouldn't it be interesting if practitioners could do that kind of commenting? Or to say, look, I tried this in my classroom, but this is what happened and this is what didn't happen. A forum so we could have that bi-directional discourse. So review is taking review to another level. Of course, review books, review technology, especially technology from a practitioner. So this practical point of view, I don't need to say anything about that because you can imagine what that would be like. But I'd like to see this idea of reviewing concept. I think it would be really interesting. Reviewing theories, just putting that practitioner voice onto something. Reflection is where I'm hoping we'll get more and more examples of principled and systematic attempt and what happened, whether it worked or didn't work, and why it worked and what didn't work. A place where people can then share that beyond just the sharing that takes place within centers. Because I know within centers that happens all the time. But a place where we could then share across and learn from each other. It also has a section of actual teaching resources, plug and play. So in order to be accepted as a plug and play, it has to be clearly an example of something that we would understand to be supported by scholarship. But the idea for this is that a teacher could say, yeah, I'm going to use that tomorrow because I'm teaching this concept tomorrow. So it's actually it's a student material. In order to qualify, it has to be multimodal. It cannot be a worksheet. It cannot be something, because there's too many outlets for that. So that makes this for practitioners or by practitioners. What we are trying to do is create something that we think practitioners would want to engage with. So it's a multimodal platform. We encourage every submission to do a verbal 30-second or less abstract. This is what it's about, because we think our teachers will listen. Nope, don't care. That's good enough for me. It's just a verbal abstract. We are encouraging multimodal submissions. So we have a really nice one early on in Gen AI of somebody showing how Gen AI works. And when you put the chat box in at the time, that was fantastic. So we could see that, and not just writing about it, we could see it. So it's video and text. So it's multimodal. And as appropriate for Hong Kong, it very much welcomes English or Chinese, and in principle, any language. But we have to be able to find somebody who can review it and check it. We spent quite a lot of time trying to decide how to manage the review process. We've come up with 4 criteria that we think can be imposed no matter what comes in. And that's why the or. Innovation or impact. Teaching, honestly, how often do you do something that's totally original and new? But if it's something that is very, very useful, that other teachers would say, yeah, thanks, good point. Yeah, or I could really use that. Innovation or impact. It's got to be scholarship. It has to be grounded in the literature. It can't just be random stuff. It's got to be grounded. And then presentation, and then a little bit of space here, right? So thank you for letting me share. I do hope that you will look up STILE, promote, and or perhaps contribute yourself. But mostly, I hope that I've convinced you that we really need to have this bridge that's going in both directions. Thank you.